I contacted the company that sold me the cylinder head gasket. They were able to provide me with the torque specs for these nuts, which is 35 foot-pounds. But before I do that, they also provided me with the intake and exhaust valve clearance, which is 6 thousandths. So I'm going to do that at this time. I'm going to reset the valve clearance, check it, and reset it on all of the valves. So the procedure is to start with one cylinder at one end. I'm going to start with this rearmost one, and you want to set that cylinder at TDC. That's the piston all the way up, both valves closed. So you want to make sure that you have it at that position before you try and take a measurement. Well, the trick here is that you've got to turn that nut right there, which is 3/8. But when you go to turn it, the tappet wants to turn. So the tappet's got flat sides to it, so you can grab it with a 3/8 inch wrench. Problem is, so little of the tappet shows that if you put a normal 3/8 inch wrench on there, it then gets in the way of getting another wrench in there to turn the nut. So I'm going to try and grab the tappet with needle nose pliers and turn it with the wrench. Well, so much for setting the valve clearance. I can't get a wrench on that tappet and not have the wrench be in the way as I'm trying to turn the nut on the top, and those nuts are actually pretty tight. And I even tried fabricating a little something to get in there and hold that while I was turning it, and it just bends because this metal's too thin. So if I had more time, I could use some thicker metal and grind a little handy wrench that would fit in there like that. Either that or take an old 3/8 inch wrench and grind it skinnier so that it would fit in there without being in the way, but I really don't feel like doing all that today and messing with it, so I think I'm just going to skip ahead. I'm going to make a new gasket and put this cover back on. Cleaned off this cover, showing that it's covered with that OD green paint that the Army loves to use, further convincing me that this is in fact a engine that was taken out of a military surplus generator. And so I'm going to got some cork material. I'm going to cut myself a new gasket. First part was easy, just use this as a template to cut the outside of the gasket. Now I got to cut out the inside. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the gasket right on here, and I can actually feel this little groove right here. So I should be able to follow that groove with a utility knife and make a nice cut. Okay, it's not perfect, but should do the job. I'd forgotten how much trouble I had taking this cover out until I went to put it back in. Getting it behind this oil pump and governor assembly and the stupid modified, for lack of a better term, firewall here, or partition. So I was able to wheel it back in, but there was no way I was going to get it in there with the gasket, so now I'm going to sneak the gasket in behind it. Alright, so that's not going to work because I got no way of keeping the gasket from sagging down. So plan B, I'm going to take the cover back out. I'm going to use some RTV to stick the gasket onto the block. Well, there goes the afternoon. Went to install the cylinder head and torque down the nuts, and found that the nuts had gotten corroded. I had them in a plastic container underneath the tarp during the past few months during the winter season, and somehow water got in there. They got badly rusted. I cleaned up the studs best I could, apparently not well enough, and even with oil I couldn't get the nuts to go on without a fight. So can't do that, because if they don't go on easily, then the problem is you're not going to get a true torque reading when you're trying to torque them down. So I've been painstakingly running a tap through every single one of the nuts and cleaning up the threads better with a wire wheel so that I can get these to all seat. So all these ones in the front are now done. They all seat down to the bottom. So I'll be able to torque those once I finish all the other ones. And then of course one of them locked up so bad that when I went to try and take it back off, the stud actually unscrewed from the block, and I had to apply a lot of heat. And really, you could see the vice grips even weren't holding. They were slipping and grinding this up, and I damaged the threads on there. So I'm gonna have to see whether or not I could fix that with a tap. but that's what's taken me, well, the better part of an hour to straighten out, and I'm still not done. Well, my neighbor wasn't able to get it straightened out without resorting to having to grind off about 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch of the stud. And so now it takes the nut nicely, but it's a little shorter. But it should be okay. Still plenty of meat on there that it's grabbing onto. I've just softly tightened down all of the nuts at this point, and now I'm going to torque them down to the 35 foot-pounds, starting off gradually. But I also kind of want to get an idea of what kind of a pattern I want to follow as far as the tightening sequence, because I can't just simply crisscross because of the fact that you get these ones in the center and that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cheat a little bit, and I'm going to go on the recommendations of the Continental N62 head bolt pattern. Well, here's my cheat sheet for my tightening sequence. This is the Continental engine's tightening sequence. Of course, it's not very accurate to what I've got, because it's got basically 5 bolts in a row in 3 rows for a total of 15. I've got 18 nuts, I should say. And you've got 7 in this row, 5 in that row, and 6 in the back row. But I can look at the pattern, and I can see that the gist of it is you start with the very center, and then you do up and down across from that center, then cross this way, then you start doing a crisscross, and then you work your way out to the edge. So I can kind of come up with my own little scheme here based on that. So I'm going to start by tightening them down to just 25 foot-pounds. Okay, that was the first round of tightening, and now I'm going to do the second and final round of tightening to the torque spec of 35 foot-pounds. Alright, cleaned up the block where the manifold gaskets go. Had to use my Dremel tool to get into some of these little tight spots, but it's nice and cleaned up, so now I'm going to cut some new gaskets. Well, the other day I was going to cut new gaskets for the exhaust manifold, and then I looked at these gaskets and see some kind of a fiber material. Who knows, maybe they're even asbestos, but anyways, they're obviously some kind of material that can take the high heat, and I noticed the gasket material that I had was a rubber-based material, which would probably melt under the temperature, so I didn't want to use that stuff. I tried to find some gasket material in a sheet form that I could cut gaskets from that would take the temperature. I couldn't find anything. There's a Victor number on this gasket of 18041. If I really worked hard, I might be able to cross that to something, but I just really want to get this thing back together and see if it'll run at all. So what I did was I picked up some of this Ultra Copper, Permatex Ultra Copper high temp RTV, and I'm going to reuse these old gaskets and put some Ultra Copper on them, and I want that to cure, so I'm out here this morning doing that, so that later this afternoon when I come home, if I have some time, I'll be able to continue working on this. Okay, I scraped off any residue off of the manifold, and I'm going to shop back out all the ports to make sure that none of that stuff gets sucked into the motor when it starts up. And then I'm going to clean the surfaces, the 2 mating surfaces, before I put the RTV on. I'm going to use a solvent to clean that to get any oil residue off. Alright, so I put a small bead on the block, then I put the gaskets on, then I put another small bead on the manifold, then I installed the manifold, and then I tightened these nuts and I snugged them up so that I could just start to see some of the RTV squeeze out, but I don't want to over tighten them because that'll force too much of the RTV sealant out and not give me a good seal. So I'm going to let that RTV cure, and then I'll come back and I'll torque these manifold nuts down this afternoon. Well, it's the end of the day. I've come home. The silicone is cured, so I torqued down the nuts for the manifold. I reinstalled this bolt that I had taken out here for this breather tube assembly, and now I can install the carburetor. Alright, I've got the carburetor reinstalled. I don't know if I'm going to even bother hooking up all this linkage and stuff right now. I might want to just try and see if I can't get the thing to run first. Yeah, doesn't take that long. I guess I should do it. Not sure if I've got this bolt in correctly. I don't think I do. Don't remember exactly what hardware went with this, so I'll have to look at my video when I took this apart. But for now, it's put together enough so that I should be able to try and start it. And then of course the choke cable was already broken anyways, so I'll just put the little arm on here so I can manually work the choke with my fingers. Well, I just hooked up the battery and cranked it over, and I still have spark, so don't have to clean the points or anything on the magneto. And getting the firing order correct was easy because I had labeled with magic marker, and I could still see my markings 1, 2, 3, and 4. So all I've got left to do now is hook up some fuel to it, and I could actually try starting it.